that what's going to be today is going to be critically necessary to our work. So first, I want to thank the Food System Caucus co-chairs for their work in partnership, and that's Senator DiDomenico and Representatives Kane, Dom, Schmid, Vargas, and Donahue. I'm so glad to be with you all. We're at 159 members now in the Food System Caucus, which is a great and whopping number given the 200 members of the legislature. And of course, if you're on this Zoom and you want to join, everyone is welcome. So we're really thrilled. The Food System Caucus is really thrilled to be co-hosting this briefing with the Massachusetts Food System Collaborative. We're joined today by Becca Miller, who's the policy director for the collaborative. And I know that she's no stranger to many of you, especially given her critical work on the Healthy Incentive Program. And we're grateful for all of Becca's work to organize today's briefing and for her nonstop advocacy for farms and farmers. I'm personally grateful to Rachel Klein from our team, who now is leading our team's work on food security, farms, and food systems. And we're really delighted to be joined by Ellen Kaler, Executive Director of the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, who is going to tell us about the New England Feeding New England project. The report, New England Feeding New England, a regional approach to food self-reliance, is really astounding and outstanding. And I know some of us had an opportunity to hear Ellen before, and we wanted to bring her to the legislature. So the report is outlining current consumption and production patterns and challenges, and then carefully and strategically, I'd say, lays out a path towards supplying 30% of our food from regional sources by 2030. And of course, this is a critical and timely goal, especially on the heels of the COVID pandemic, when all of us saw the real challenges and vulnerability of our food system and food supply chains. And of course, given our current work, a collective current work to meet the White House conference charge of ending hunger nationally, and that means in the Commonwealth by 2030. It's timely, necessary work, and I'm going to turn it to Becca, who'll introduce Ellen. And again, just on behalf of the Food System Caucus chairs, thank you so much, all of you, for joining. Okay, over to you, Becca.
Thank you so much, Senator Comerford, and good morning, everyone. It's lovely to see you all here. Again, my name is Becca Miller, for folks who are just joining us, and I work at the Mass Food System Collaborative as our policy director. You might know us from campaigns including the Campaign for Healthy Incentives Program funding, or food literacy, or agricultural equity, and we're grateful for your partnership, especially the Food System Caucus co-chairs who are so hardworking. The collaborative was formed after the completion of the Massachusetts Local Food Action Plan in December 2015, and we support collective action towards an equitable, sustainable, resilient, and connected local food system here in the Commonwealth. One of our projects is being part of the New England Food System Planners, which is working with Ellen and her lovely partners in Vermont. So Ellen Kaler, I'm going to introduce and hype up a little bit, is the Executive Director of the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, which manages Vermont's statewide food system development efforts known as VT Farm to Plate. Ellen helped shape and publish the 2011 to 2020 Farm to Plate Strategic Plan and the 2021 to 2030 Vermont Agriculture and Food System Strategic Plan, as well as supports the development and work of the statewide Farm to Plate network. Ellen has served on the Working Lands Enterprise Fund since its inception in 2012 and was appointed by Governor Phil Scott to serve on the Future of Agriculture Commission in 2021. Vermont Sustainable Job Fund is part of the New England State Food System Planners Partnership and provided grants and project management and administrative support to the New England Feeding New England project, which we're going to hear more about in a few minutes. So Ellen, we're so grateful to your time, and please take it away.
Thank you so very much, Becca, and to Jay and Senator Comerford and Rachel. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm going to be walking us through a slide deck to touch on a lot of different components of this pretty important and far-reaching foundational research that just came out in June called the New England Feeding New England Regional Self-Reliance for our food system. And what's to know is that I'm going to be going fairly quickly because we want to leave some time for some question and answers. And there's a lot of ground to cover. So what I'll be doing after my presentation is I'll be sending to Becca a PDF of the slide deck that includes all of the speaker notes. And that way you can spend more time with it. And I would really encourage you to spend time with reviewing the entire research effort. I think what's important also to say up front is that what we produced is foundational research. It is not a regional food system plan. And so there are no hardcore recommendations in the report. However, as Senator Comerford mentioned, there's in essence breadcrumbs all along the way that I think provide a good sense of the general direction that we need to be going to strengthen our regional food system and to ultimately achieve a goal of 30% regional food consumption by regional food production by 2030. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and get underway, and hopefully this will all work.
That's perfect, Ellen. That's
excellent.
A perfect view.
All right, thank you so much. So as Becca mentioned, the New England Food System Plan Partnership exists. It is an organization that it's not actually its own entity. It's a collaboration between 6 backbone organizations across the 6-state region, along with Food Solutions New England. And back in April, we added members to our partnership, represented from each of the state ag commissions in New England. So we're really pleased about that relationship. The partnership works in collaboration with Food Solutions New England, which starting in 2011, worked to develop and release the New England Food Vision, which set out a goal of 50% regional food production and consumption by 2060. And since our work happens mainly at the state level across our 6 backbone organizations, as we work to increase food production along with the movement of and consumption of food in each of our states, we felt that it would be really helpful to have a nearer term goal. And that's why we set a target of 30% by 2030. So the big question that really motivated us, as Senator Comerford said, was coming out of the pandemic, experiencing what we have been with recent droughts, with floods, with as well as fires in the West, and flooding that we just occurred here in the Northeast this summer. We asked really the central question was, if where our food came from suddenly mattered, would we be prepared with a reliable, safe, and abundant food supply? And so while there's no single county, state, or region that can become food self-sufficient, we believe the quest for increased regional food self-reliance is both an investment in our shared future and an insurance policy against future risks, particularly due to climate change. So we launched an effort which includes 3 phases over, we're imagining a 10-year period. We started with the research phase back in the fall of 2021. We published the research findings in June of 2023, and now we're in the process of conducting a lot of presentations, a lot of convenings, beginning to reach out to organizations to try to align our activities towards the implementation of this 30 by 2030 goal. Now, in terms of who we assembled, we put out a call for researchers through an RFP process, and then we looked to have a very diverse group of researchers based on gender, race, geography, discipline, and in alignment with our specific research areas. And in total, we had 16 researchers that worked on this project over about a 1.5-year long process. The names that are in yellow are folks that are actually hail from the great state of Massachusetts. So Brian Donahue from Brandeis University was the team lead for the dietary patterns team. Nick Rockler is with an organization called Kibet Rockler and Associates. He's an economist. Laura Barley currently works at MDAR, but formerly from American Farmland Trust based in Massachusetts, and Ramon Borges Mendez, who's at Clark University. We also had a 15-member advisory committee from across the country, and Eric Rim from the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health was part of that group. And then ultimately, we published 7 components of this research, and I'm gonna touch on highlights from much of this body of work. And all of these are available on our website and can be easily accessed that way. We are also in the process of releasing 6 state briefs where we've taken some of the highlights from each of the components of the report and dialed it in more specifically to each state. And we are going to be releasing the Massachusetts state brief sometime this week. So it's just about, it's in the very, very final stages of putting it together. So in the executive summary, we capture key findings from each of the report's 4 volumes, and it attempts to answer the question, what will it really take to grow, raise, produce, harvest, and catch more regional food and move it through a complex supply chain to our homes and other places that we eat? And it's, as I mentioned, it's important to note that we have not what we have done here is published foundational research, and it's not a regional food system plan. Although our belief is that it would be very helpful to have something that is somewhat similar to a regional plan, but that would take much more public engagement in order to be able to accomplish. So while each state legislature, state Department of Agriculture, state government, state governor understandably focuses on the needs of the people and businesses in their own state, being too narrowly focused within state boundaries may limit our view and our focus. So if we take a wider view of our 6-state region, we can see that collectively we produce a wide range of products New Englanders eat on a regular basis. So the leading product categories, which probably is not a surprise to you, is around in fisheries and in dairy and in vegetables. But as you can see here, there's a very wide range of products that we do produce. We also manufacture a lot of different types of food in the state. And cheese, beer, meat, baked goods, and more are the leading products that we produce across the region. Again, we produce a lot of what we eat. It's important to understand, though, that across the 6-state region, in terms of what we're producing, food production itself takes place primarily in the 3 northern New England states, while the vast majority of the population lives in the southern 3 New England states. So what can we do to think and feel more like a region? What can we do to help consumers in Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts care about the farmers and fishers in Maine? How might Maine farmers and fishers realize how important they are to Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts consumers, for instance? Beyond the executive summary, we then also published a document called the Common Food System Challenges Backgrounder. And what we found was that there exists common challenges across all aspects of the food system, no matter where you are in the country. And although the conditions on the ground may vary by local contexts, cultures, and ecologies, every food system on Earth is grappling with these challenges. So I also just want to note here that this research is not comprehensive nor all-inclusive. It was assembled based on the research that we conducted and through the 10 focus group sessions that we held. But more work could be done to capture additional challenges in subsequent convenings. So we identified the 7 challenges across the food system that are listed here on this slide, but I'm not going to cover them all because that would take a couple of more hours. But rather, I'm going to hit a few highlights for you. So just know that we've done a deep dive on this through this research component and encourage you to spend some time with it. So one of the biggest challenges we face as a region is preparing our food supply for climate change. This slide shows that the projected risks of climate change by county for things like rainfall, hurricanes, sea level rise, water stress, fires, heat stress. Obviously, sea level rise is a big threat for our coastlines across 5 states. And one of the important things to know, and you'll hear about in a minute, is that we have projected that we need another 990,000 acres to be in production across the region if we're going to meet our 30% by 2030 goal. And so if we think about it from that vantage point of rising sea levels and pressure on our southern coastlines, that's going to put migratory pressure on our northern New England states, which is primarily where food production is taking place, as more and more people leave the coastal areas because of sea level rise and start to migrate more north. It really means that we need to double down even more so on our ability to protect the finite resource that is our prime agricultural soils. So what do climate scientists say about projected risks in Massachusetts? You can see here, this will not be a surprise to any of you. Hurricanes is a very substantial risk. We see it happening with greater and greater frequency. There's also water stresses, extreme rains that are impacting our areas. We saw massive flooding that happened across the region and also in Massachusetts over the summer, for instance. We also see in Massachusetts that there is a medium risk of wildfires, again, because of the potential for these swings between too much water and not enough water. Sea level rise in certain areas are definitely a risk as well. The changing climate is also making our fisheries more vulnerable, which not only has implications for our food supply, but also for the jobs and livelihoods that are connected to this part of our food supply. What you can see here is the order of magnitude of those types of catch that are vulnerable to climate change. The funding made possible through your HIP program, Massachusetts, is really, truly commendable. What you all have been able to mobilize in terms of funding is just outstanding. And as we can see here, that the additional funding that's made possible to families during the pandemic, as well as your HIP program, have enabled thousands of households to become more food secure, as average monthly SNAP benefits per participants increased 57% in 2021. We expect that the 2022 food insecurity data will probably tick back up as federal funds have been phased out due to the pandemic era funding sunsetting. But it's important to note here that we made a real difference in addressing food insecurity because we put more funding forward to support households. So we know how to do this. It's also important to note that food insecurity is much more prevalent in Hispanic and Black communities in the state of Massachusetts and needs to continue to be an area of significant focus. This slide shows that across the US, how racial disparities impacts households' food security, with Black and Hispanic households being significantly more food insecure than white households. One of the things that we did in this research was to take a look at what's called LILA data, which is low income, low access census tract information. And you can spend some more time studying this slide later, but what's important to know here is that the BIPOC community makes up 32.4% of the population of Massachusetts, but 48% of its population is living in low-income, low-access census tracts where access to grocery stores with a full range of products, including produce, is limited. And this is an area that is in need of, again, even greater focus going forward. One of the other additional graphics, maps that we were able to produce for Massachusetts was to take a deep dive looking at using the LILA census tract data, looking at Springfield, Massachusetts. And the thing that really stood out for us here is the geography of supermarket chains impacts food access and security. So healthy food is easier to get for some people, but expensive or far away for others. So these disparities and inequities in food access are systemic and the result of structural racism and poverty. So food access challenges and food insecurity disproportionately impact Black, Hispanic, Indigenous, low-income, and rural New Englanders. And what you can see on the slide is the location of various stores within these different census tracts around in Springfield, Massachusetts. And the thing that should pop out is the sheer number of Dollar Trees and dollar stores, which, as we know, are not full service grocery stores and have very limited, if any, produce or fresh, healthy foods. One of the persistent challenges we face in New England is the loss of our agricultural land base over time. While this has stabilized somewhat over the past 10 years, our research shows that we need to both maintain our existing productive agricultural land and better utilize 400,000 acres of otherwise existing ag land, and clear likely will need to clear about 590,000 acres of new ag production in order to achieve our 30% by 2030 goal. And this is, a lot of people ask me, well, what does clearing mean and where would that take place? We do not in any way indicate where that would happen or exactly how or on what timeline. What's most important to know is that there are about 400,000 acres of underutilized land that needs to be more intensively brought into use first. And then after we do that, we can think about prime ag land that has perhaps not been utilized for a decade or two, where we might need to be reinvigorating. And that might mean that some of those fields have started to go back to forest, and we need to think about whether that's a location where we want to actually clear. According to the American Farmland Trust report, Farms Under Threat by 2040, the business as usual modeling shows that Massachusetts could lose another 73,800 acres of farmland to development if more is not done to secure this finite resource for agricultural production. And we know that you all have been very focused on this in Massachusetts, and it's just really important to keep up that effort. In terms of land and agriculture in Massachusetts, stuff that you may already know as you've looked at research from the Census of Agriculture in the past, but there's over 491,000 acres in production in Massachusetts. Similarly to other states in the region, Massachusetts has lost a lot of cropland and pasture land over the decades. But Massachusetts has the highest percentage of total farmland devoted to fruit, 3.3%, the second highest for berries, 10.6%, and the third most for vegetables, 13.5%, compared to other New England states. So you have a lot that can be built upon and much to be protected and expanded upon. We've provided some data from the 2017 Census of Ag, the total number of farms in Massachusetts. And we're hoping that once the 2022 Census of Ag numbers are released, we'll be able to update these tables. Total ag sales in Massachusetts was over $487 million. The strategic question for you all to consider is, could you focus more of your policy and state resources towards farms that want to grow and have the land base to grow? So in Vermont, for instance, we have a number of $25 million product sectors. And what we've been asking is, what would it take to expand production and sales in such a way that we might have more $50 million product sectors? So what might this mean in terms of business technical assistance, access to capital, access to land, access to distribution, workforce, and such, if we were to be more strategic and targeted in our focus around growing certain subsectors and product categories? Just quickly, the data is clear that we also have a lot of work ahead of us to ensure racial equity around farmland ownership. In 2020, 28.7% of New England's population was made up of people of color. However, farms with any producer reporting race or ethnicity is Hispanic, Latino, Black, Indigenous, or Asian, along with or in combination with other races, made up just 4.9% of farms and working just 2.5% of farmland. So an extra special focus on being able to provide access to land, access to capital for BIPOC farmers is going to be critical to our future. And of course, you all also have a really big job ahead of you, because as we're interested in expanding regional production, it's at a time when increasing land values in New England are really high, and they're some of the highest in the country. So what can be done to protect prime agricultural lands that keep them affordable to current and future generations of farmers, especially bipark farmers? So in Massachusetts, your average acre of farmland, of land in farmland is $15,200 per acre, which is very, very unaffordable. So what did we do? What we did with the four main volumes of the research was to update some work that was previously done. In this volume, Estimating Resilient Eating Patterns, we looked at the original work that was done in the New England Food Vision work of 2014 that Brian Donahue did, and we updated the data and updated some of the assumptions. And Brian Donahue, who was one of the principal researchers on the New England Food Vision, was also the lead researcher for this volume, along with Laura Barley, Scott Richardson, and Dr. Sarah Amin. So before I get into some of the details, I just want to underscore what it is that we mean by resilient eating. And I think what's easiest is to just read this. So resilient eating is an important element in overall regional food system resilience. Resilience goes beyond increased regional self-reliance in production of healthy food by sustainable methods. It must ensure food security for everyone. So resilient eating is healthier eating plus improved access, greater food and nutrition security, support for local and regional food system businesses, and support for local farms and fisheries. Resilient eating reduces the vulnerability for individuals, and in doing so, increases community food security and empowerment. And this is really important. So when you hear me using the language resilient eating, this is what we mean by that. One of the other things that we did in preparation for releasing this particular volume was that we engaged an expert panel of 7 food and nutrition experts who gave a lot of really important feedback and input into the methodology and the assumptions that went into this research. So what we did was we reviewed the difference in calories between 2 dietary eating scenarios. And it's important to know that in nutrition science, a unit metric of energy is a useful, meaning calories is a useful way of making comparisons. But it can also be translated into servings. So, and it also can be translated into pounds. So the USDA dietary guidelines for Americans are guidelines for healthy eating. These are guidelines and not recommendations or prescriptions. So it means that there's a range of possibilities for the specifics of what you could eat within any of these food categories. So we in no way, shape, or form are prescribing a particular exact specific diet. It's just to give you the 2 ends of the spectrum of what are we eating currently, what does it look like in terms of our current eating pattern, and then what would a resilient eating pattern look like. And what you can see here is that currently New Englanders are consuming about 2,783 calories a day on average, and a resilient eating diet, if by 2030, would be looking more like 2,320 calories. And this is more in line with what is recommended by the USDA DGA guidelines.
Ellen, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to share that we have about 15 minutes left for the presentation.
Yes, I'm going to move along. Thank you. So in this slide, you spend some more time with it. Indicates how we would need to shift some of our eating patterns in order to achieve a resilient eating. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. You can dig in a little bit more. Moving on to volume 2, estimating production for regional self-reliance. Chris Peters, who now works at USDA ARS, based out of the University of Vermont, and who used to be a professor at Tufts University in Boston, was the main research lead on this volume. And we covered both land-based agriculture, as well as fisheries and aquaculture. We also published a separate supplement on seafood as part of this volume. As in lead up to releasing this, we had conducted 10 focus groups with producers across the region, so that to get some very helpful input and insights into the challenges that they are facing in terms of increasing food production in their product categories. The big takeaway from this research was to calculate regional self-reliance by food groups in terms of pounds. So what our estimates show here is that across the 6-state New England region, we are producing 6.5 billion pounds of food. If you take a look at USDA food availability data, we are consuming in the region 31.7 billion pounds. That food comes from all over the country as well as from New England. If you do a basic ratio, what that means is that regional self-reliance, if we ate everything that we produced in the region, we would be able to consume about 20.7% of what we produce. However, we know that we don't consume everything that we produce in the region, right? Most of your cranberries leave the region. Maine blueberries leave the region. Most of our seafood leaves the region. A lot of our dairy leaves the region. So, so part of what we're exploring here is how can we retain more of what we produce and eat it in the region? And then what is the gap of what we actually need to expand in terms of production in order to achieve a 30% regional self-reliance goal by 2030. You can see here that we are more regionally self-reliant in dairy and vegetables and less so across other food groups. And we also did the calculation not only by pounds, but looking at servings and calories, because what we wanted to understand was, was it even possible to get to 30% by 2030? And if so, what would it look like? Our calculations show that we can only do that by looking at servings and not by calories, unfortunately. So as I mentioned, what that means then, how that gets translated into the land base is that we need to, in order to achieve 30% regional food production available for consumption in servings, we need 400,000 of existing underutilized cropland to come back into production, and then eventually 590,000 in new cropland being brought into production. As I mentioned, we also covered fisheries and seafood, but because we don't have a lot of time today, and I'm not going to go into this topic, but suffice it to say that we had 2 fisheries experts that were part of the research team, and we had 3 of our focus groups who were on fisheries and aquaculture. So there's a lot of good data in here, and I would encourage you to spend some time with it. Nick Rockler, an economist, used the in-plan model to develop estimates for economic impact of our food system in a region that has never been done before. And so a high-level takeaways is that our food system is a very large part of our economy in the region, $190 billion just in wholesale distribution. $190 billion, $190 billion in total. 76.2 billion of that is in distribution, wholesale distribution, and 50 billion in retail sales. So it's a very, very large part of our overall economy, and represents almost 1 million people are employed in the food system across the 6-state region. So again, very, very significant. Remember, our population in New England right now is 15.3 million people, and about 1 million people are employed in the food system in some way, shape, or form. So how does that look in Massachusetts? Well, you have $85 billion worth of sales happening in the food system across these areas of the food system: agriculture, fisheries, food manufacturing, et cetera. And you have 457,000 Massachusetts residents who are employed in the food system. And if you take a look at the growth in both jobs as well as sales between 2007 and 2017, That's actually significant growth compared to other sectors of the economy. And it is growing. I mean, as you know, we can't survive without eating. And so the food system is recession-proof, and it is also an absolutely critical aspect of our economy and of our ability to survive as a species. We also took a look at wages in the food system, and as you probably know, many of the jobs in our food system do not pay a livable wage, and this is an area of increased focus that we would also really recommend individual states and organizations take a look at and do some work on. Finally, our volume 4, understanding market channels, we identify the access points of various market channels, which is basically how people get food. And we determined how much of what we eat is represented in each market channel. And we describe who utilizes these market channels and estimate 30% of the total food and beverage expenditures by each state in the region in order to hit that 30% mark. So we do a lot in this work to try to help people understand how our food system works. And so this graphic is a simple representation of how food moves through the supply chain from how it is grown and harvested through to consumers. Now, this graphic is a whopper, and a lot of people have found this to be quite interesting to take a look at. By population and by sales, as I mentioned, direct sales of food in New England is 85.5 billion. When I mentioned the 190 billion, that represents direct sales, indirect sales, and induced sales. This 85.5 billion is direct sales. So within Massachusetts, you, as the largest population group in the region, represent the largest component of that at 41.9 billion. And so you basically represent, in essence, half of all sales in New England. Now, how does that break down in Massachusetts? Here's another way to look at it. Groceries represent 42.5% of all sales, restaurants 39.6% of all sales. So that is food those are two major market channels, the two most significant market channels, and represents the area that we need to have the greatest focus in terms of being able to get more local and regional food into those market channels. A lot of our efforts have been focused, understandably and rightfully, on direct sales and on food service contractors like farm to institution, farm to school. Those are all really important. But as you can see here, they represent a fairly small percentage of where people acquire their food. They matter from an access perspective, they matter from a racial equity perspective, but ultimately they are small in comparison. One of the things we also did for each state was to calculate the number of food stores in each of the states and categorize them from an ownership perspective. So Massachusetts has over 250 independent stores, which includes many small grocery stores, general and country stores, bodegas, ethnic markets, etc. So one thing to know is that in Vermont, we also have a lot of independent stores, and we've been running an independent retail grocer training program since 2016. And that has made a significant improvement in the amount of local food sourcing that's happened in these stores. And the benefit of working with independently owned stores is that they tend to be more responsive to their consumer base and are often more open to sourcing locally. So just like direct sales, if you all in Massachusetts could think about having some kind of a retail grocers training program and focus more of your attention on independent stores, we might be able to have a greater chance of increasing local and regional food sourcing to occur in that grocery channel. I'm going to skip over direct sales. Important point here, institutions represent less than 4% of food and beverage sales, but 25% of the population spends time in New England food institutions daily. So that's when I mentioned, while it's a small market channel, it has a big and outsized impact from an accessibility and racial equity perspective. And Becca, I'm almost done. just so you know. So one of the things that we also were able to calculate because of some new data that had just come out of USDA in April, actually, was the calculations of food expenditure per capita by state. So what we know is that Massachusetts had the 16th highest per capita food expenditures of any state in the country. So about $5,251 is spent per capita on food in Massachusetts. So if you think about that, then in 20, we were able to project forward based on the past 10 years, if what we would be spending based on inflation in 2030. And so by 2030, per capita in Massachusetts, we could expect about $6,239 to be spent on food per person. So if you then take 30% of that, that becomes, in essence, the target for per capita to spend $1,872 per capita on regional food. That would get us to our goal of 30%. And what's important to know is we're not suggesting here that residents need to spend $1,872 more on food. It is simply shifting from what we're currently spending on, which comes from anywhere, and shifting towards more local food and regional food. And then, of course, what we really have to make sure is that this is food that, as I said, is accessible to everybody. This cannot just be about local and regional food for the wealthiest among us. It needs to be through our policies and our programs and our practices and our market channels. We need to make sure that this kind of local and regional food is available to everybody. So in summary, we know we have the capacity and the ability and the ingenuity to create a food system that's more self-reliant, but the current system presents several barriers to doing so. So what we are looking for is to identify the policies and investments that support public and private supply chain businesses and infrastructure so that we can build a more resilient, strong regional food system that would mean more jobs, healthier populace, greater stability of our economy, our workforce, and our food supply chain. So ways that you can get involved: read the reports, use the resource to support your policy work, identify ways for government policies and funding priorities to align with or contribute to the 30% by 2030 regional food goal. Consider passing a local food definition in Massachusetts. It's similar to the one that's adopted by the Vermont Legislature in 2020, which built off one that they had done back in 2007. This is really important in terms of our ability to actually quantify how much local food and regional food is being consumed in the region. And finally, we're conducting local food counts in 5 New England states, including Massachusetts, which will be done sometime in early 2024. And we're exploring how the other New England states can also pass a local food definition. And then, as I mentioned when we first started, we're working with our 6 state agriculture department partners to maximize the deployment of incoming federal funds to be aligned around the 30 by 2030 goals. So I know I covered a lot of ground in a little bit of time, and there's not a lot of time left for questions, but I'm happy to take your questions. And thank you so much for your interest. And I look forward to working with you as you go forward.
Thanks so much, Ellen. And I don't see any questions in the chat, but I do just want to welcome folks to use the raise your hand feature in Zoom or to come off mute and ask your questions. We have about 10 minutes left with Ellen, and I know there was a lot of data that I think it'll take some time for folks to digest if you're like me and you need some brain space to think through what this means for our state, but we want to make sure that, you know, Ellen, your time is valued. So Representative Blais, I see your hand is raised.
Thanks so much. I'm in the car, so I hope you can hear me. This report is incredible, and I would just want to thank everybody who contributed to it. There's so much to digest in it, and I had to hop off for a quick call somewhere along the line, and I'm sorry if this was covered. You noted how much land we were going to need in New England to produce the food to be sustainable or to meet our 30 by 30 goals. Did you take into account producing food in buildings or warehouses, or, you know, I'm thinking about Hoyok, for example, and the abandoned warehouses that they have there. I'm just wondering how infrastructure can help us maybe instead of land.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, great question. I did not cover that. We did not have the ability, the capacity or the funding to be able to really dig in deep to urban agricultural opportunities. We know they definitely exist. Urban ag is very important from a food access perspective, and introduces a lot of urban folks to what is local fresh food in many cases, especially in areas where there may be a lot less availability of traditional grocery stores. So that's all really important. We are seeing more increase in the use of greenhouses and hydroponics and vertical growing, vertical farming, for instance. And while I think that there's a real opportunity there in some areas, and we should basically do everything everywhere we possibly can to become more food self-reliant, I think that overall, the overall impact, the overall ability to meet the sheer volume of the local food need is not going to be able to be handled just by urban agriculture and vertical farming. That being said, I do think one of the big questions that's out there, and maybe this is a touchy subject, but I'm going to say it anyways, is we do have a lot of greenhouses in this region, especially in Connecticut, for instance, that are currently being used to grow sod and grow flowers. And not to say that those aren't important, but as we are being impacted more and more by climate change and by the loss of land because of migration pressures, by climate impacts on soils and farmland, and et cetera, I do think we're going to ultimately have to face some hard questions about what is the best and highest use of the greenhouses that we have in the region, and something to be explored and looked at. We also were unable in this report to take a look at the way in which at-home gardens, foraging, hunting, fishing can also be a very important supplement for families in terms of meeting their food needs. So all of that's important. Would love to dig in more deeply to a lot of them, but we really did focus primarily on being able to increase food production and land and aquaculture, and utilizing our fisheries for regional consumption.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Representative Chicola, do you have a question?
Thank you so much. Sorry, like Rep. Lay, I'm also working my way into the State House, and I just want to first echo what she said about what an amazing report this is and how exciting and inspirational I'm finding hearing about this data, since, you know, it clearly underscores that we have a lot of work to do, but a lot of very important work. So I do have one question. I was intrigued by your comment that we can't meet the 30% by 2030 goal if we count calories, but we can potentially meet it if we count servings. Did you do the projection on if we meet the servings, what percentage would that represent of calories? If that makes sense as a question.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. I don't know the answer to that, and I can ask Chris Peters about that. The reason that it's a little challenging is because, for instance, some food is just naturally more calorically dense and tends to be heavier than other foods, right? So 100 weight of milk is nutrient dense and can meet more of our caloric needs on a per serving basis, but also in some cases on caloric basis. Whereas, you know, a head of lettuce, for instance, is very lightweight and calorically not dense. But we can meet those the important nutrients that we need in a servings perspective.
Okay. And then I guess one follow-up question, you know, when I talk so my district is super passionate about the environment, and a lot of people are pushing that we go meatless and dairyless for environmental purposes, but I have my misgivings about whether or not that won't create a tremendous amount of processing, packaging, potential chemicals in our food, and a greater harm than just going to a more natural, sustainable agricultural practices with regenerative meat grazing systems, right? Regenerative, sorry, that was the word I was looking for. Did you, is there any thought in the future to sort of taking a look at the methane production and the environmental value of just having the milk be local and not eliminating the milk and the use of cows, for instance?
Yes. So I wanted to just pop back because I didn't get to spend time on this. I'm not sure if people are seeing this particular slide. So when we looked at the unchanged eating pattern versus resilient eating pattern, in terms of reducing calories, we talk about increasing fruit consumption to 2 cups a day, up from 0.8, 3 cups a day in vegetables, up from 1.9 cups. We maintained dairy at the same level, and then we slightly reduced the proteins, and the total protein consumptions, while decreasing, we're calling for more seafood, nuts, beans, for instance. Perfect. More whole, right? So it's really this balanced approach. It's not saying don't eat any meat, but think about the quality of the meat. For instance, is it grass-based? Is it local? Right. So we do know from the research that grass-based meat those animals produce low methane because their bodies are eating the things that they really are most geared towards eating, which is grass. So there's ways that there's ways to address those concerns. It's also important, and I didn't say this, but it is really a through line for all of this work. This has to be done in a resilient and a regenerative way. We have to have greater emphasis on soil health, soil quality, water quality, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, because we know that that's a major contributor. So we can't just we're not calling for just expanding local agriculture at the expense of the environment. It has to we need to bring these in balance and do it in a way that that we actually haven't been doing as much. There's been increased improvements, right? But we have a long way to go, and we're so lucky that the USDA has a climate an agricultural climate hub in New Hampshire that's doing a lot of this cutting edge research around soil health and water quality and such. So you raise a really important point. We have to do this in a resilient and regenerative way. Otherwise, we're not really ultimately going to get anywhere.
Thanks so much. And I look forward to getting a copy of the slides and reviewing the report in greater detail. Really appreciate your work.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for the questions. And we will be sending out the slide deck, the report, and many other things in a follow-up email. Ellen, do you want to, I think we have time, if you want to just like tease what's going to be in the state brief that we're releasing for the Commonwealth this week, just so folks can look forward to that in their inbox as well.
Well, actually, so I did have a lot of the slides contained the graphics that are in the state brief that is coming. And then what the state brief also includes is a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats graph that the Massachusetts Food System Collaborative and the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources worked on collaboratively. And then there's a few next steps that you all have also identified. So I'm hopeful that those will be of great interest to the agricultural committees and to the Food System Caucus, and provide that as a helpful resource to you as you do your important work. And I would just say, just to put a finer point on it, as you know, there's a lot of money coming into our states because of the federal rebuilding efforts in the Inflation Reduction Act and funds that are coming through the USDA that are unprecedented and have not been here before. And so one of the exciting things that I think is just starting to take shape, and we need to really double down on, is how can we utilize this special one-time, once-in-a-generation money to really focus our investments in infrastructure that is going to service the entire region and not just any one individual state. If you take a look at the amount of dollars coming in all 6 states and think about it in a more regional approach to infrastructure investments, into business assistance investments, in terms of grants and such, I think we can actually go even farther with our efforts than what any one individual state can do on its own. So I would really highly encourage you all as the Food System Caucus to reach out to your counterparts in the state ag committees in the other states and talk about this, because you all have a really important role in helping to shape where those funds go, in addition to the ag departments in our 6 states. There's a lot that we can be doing and pulling together and utilizing this very special opportunity we have over the next 5 years.
Thanks so much, Ellen. I really appreciate it. I do just want to recognize that it's basically 11 a.m. So we know that folks are super busy. So I just wanted to say thank you so much, Ellen, for taking the time and doing this, even when you're feeling a little bit under the weather.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I will just share that Ellen also presented to the entire Mass Department of Agricultural Resources staff, all 100 plus of them. And you're also presenting to the Mass Seafood Marketing Steering Committee in November. So there's a lot of presentations happening, and there's a lot of work that we're looking forward to doing with you all in the next steps. So again, we'll follow up with an email with a lot of these resources that were discussed today. I know it's a lot to digest, but we're really grateful for the partnership of the Food System Caucus, especially the co-chairs and you all for your work in supporting the food system in the Commonwealth. So thank you all, and it's great to see you again.
Thank you.